What is up, Leafs fam? This is the Leafs Conversation. I am Norman James. Mike Augello is standing by. I have to say thank you so much for all of your support for this podcast. We've hit a milestone for subscribers on YouTube. Our anchor numbers are through the roof. iTunes, the same thing. Google Play is making its way. So again, thank you so much for all you do to support this podcast, whether you love us, whether you hate us. Keep on coming back. With that said, we have another podcast to produce for you right now. We're talking about the Marlies sweeping through the Syracuse Crunch onto the conference finals of the Calder Cup playdowns. Will the Marlies win the AHL championship? And does it matter to you? It matters to Mike, and I will tell you why. Plus, we'll talk a little bit about the GM search for the Maple Leafs. Are they really looking outside of 40 Bay for their next head of the team? We don't seem to think so, but there are some other things going on. The Leafs Conversation with Mike Augello and Norm James starts right now. And we are joined by our friend, the one and only Mike Augello. Mike, I know it's a beautiful morning in Buffalo, New York, but you're also feeling pretty bad because that was your last trip to Syracuse for a while.
Yeah. Good morning, Norman. Yeah, I mentioned to a few friends of mine, if you ever want to feel good about living in Buffalo, visit Syracuse for a couple of days.
Ooh, that's snap! Oh, snap!
Yeah, I know. I'm not trying to be, but Buffalo seems very vibrant compared to Syracuse. But I can't complain. Unlike last year where the Marlies went there and it was the city of death for them because they lost 4 times there, it was much more uplifting in terms of the outcome for the Maple Leafs affiliate because they walked in there and in the first period of both games, they really slammed the door and set a tone. And once they did that, I think that Syracuse, as opposed to last year where they sort of had the momentum built by the big crowd there, they were sort of snuffed out, and 4 straight for the Marlies.
This is the Leafs Conversation. Norman James in London, Ontario. Mike Augello in Buffalo, New York. The Marlies winning 2-1 in Syracuse to sweep the Crunch. They're moving on to the conference finals now. They'll play either Charlotte or Lehigh Valley. Reading Lance Hornby's story in the Toronto Sun, it was a nail-biting Game 4 in Syracuse. It was a tight finish. Interesting words to use when the home team that you're writing about just swept the series. I mean, they've got to sell papers, but tight and nail-biting, come on.
Well, I with the exception of the 7-1 thrashing on Sunday, it really was. I mean, the Game 1 was a back-and-forth sort of seesaw battle where, the Marlies, they'd go up by a goal and Syracuse would tie it up. They'd get up by 2 in the third, and Syracuse would narrow it to 1. It was not a runaway victory. And then Game 2 was double overtime, and I thought Syracuse was actually the better team in the second overtime, and Freddie Gauthier scores the winner. And I think they really got crushed by that loss because it was really uncharacteristic of them to not show up in their own building, and they really got demolished by the Marlies in Game 3. And then yesterday, Toronto gets up 2-0 in the first, and then even by Sheldon Keefe's description, they sort of played that defensively responsible road type of game, which, for the Maple Leafs and their affiliate is nothing you can really feel comfortable about because they usually can't hold on to the lead, but this team, they gave up a goal midway through the third, but they held on for the victory.
You and I talked about the Marlies and their exploits a couple of years ago on the Leafs Conversation when I was still working in television and we were on SoundCloud primarily. And we wondered what the value in any sort of success at the AHL level really meant to the overall picture of how the organization's trying to develop. Sure, you could go ahead and win a minor league crown. Does that translate into, any value for the big league club? Now, you want your players to season well and progress well at the below the top level in order to be ready to get to the NHL. Do you see sort of a are there two things happening here? You have a group of players coming together to try to win another championship, and who knows, it might be the biggest championship a lot of these players ever win because making the NHL is tough. But also that group coming together on this journey towards a potential title. You're seeing the development of each individual in order for them to take that next step to the NHL and help the big team. Because at the end of the day, that is essentially why they are there, to develop and be ready to make that next step.
I think it's a dual track. I really think that it's not just, a bunch of AHL veterans or a bunch of players who have not made the Leafs yet. I think it's development as well. And, I was going to write something today for Sporting News regarding the fact that, the key contributors for this Marlies team are players who in the next year or two are probably going to be on the Leafs. Not only, Andreas Janssen and Travis Dermott, who were sent down by the Leafs after the loss to Boston, but Carl Grundstrom, their second round pick from 2016, a guy like Pierre Engvall, who was sort of another Janssen type, a 7th round pick from a few years ago, who's played in the Swedish league for a few years and come over and will get signed to an entry-level contract. Liljegren, who's probably a year or two away. But, I mean, there's development there. It's not just like 2012 where it was, Gardner and Kadri and a bunch of, Mike Zigomanis, a bunch of veteran guys. This is a team that's developing young players, and I think they put together a group of AHL veterans that are helping those young guys learn how to play and learn how to win.
Have you had a chance to talk to Travis Dermott while he's been with the
Marlies? Yeah, we interviewed him yesterday after the game, and I asked him where he thought. Did the playoff series against Boston really help him in terms of, the speed and the development and the, to be dealing with the pressure of the AHL playoffs, and because he's been sort of targeted. It's like Syracuse realizes that this is an NHL defenseman and we can't really let him freewheel or we're going to get taken to pieces. And they targeted him, they hit him a lot, but he seemed to overcome that. And he said, obviously, the NHL playoffs is at a higher level, it's at a higher speed. And things are at a little bit of a slower pace, but the intensity of a playoff match in the AHL, I mean, it still has a lot of that. So I think it prepared him better for the playoffs this year as opposed to last year, where I think he was good, but at times I think he felt the pressure.
What an interesting experience for Travis Dermott. It's like going from playing in Yankee Stadium to being, stuck out in left field in Medicine Hat 2 days later. I mean, the extremes are interesting. You're playing in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, and now you're playing for a Calder Cup. And for someone like Travis Dermott, who has to feel like, while he may not be solidified into an NHL position guaranteed permanently, he's expected to be there. And now this run in the AHL, probably most likely his last at this level, has to feel like gravy for him. But he also has to prove that, look, I should be able to stand out here because my destiny is with the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, this is like you said, probably his last opportunity, and he's friends with a lot of these guys. There's a camaraderie. He played most of the year with the Marlies. He stepped up, and he's likely going to be a top 4 defensemen with the Leafs for the next decade based on how he performed as a rookie this year. So this is his last chance to win with his buds that he came up with.
Yeah.
And I think that is worth a lot. He's best friends with Andrew Nielsen, who was drafted the same year as him, and the other players in that team he spent a couple years with. So I think that that is the value that he takes from that. He'll always have that if they go on to go through the conference final, get to the Calder Cup final, and do what the 2012 team couldn't do, which is win a Calder Cup.
I was following the Marlies Live hashtag on Twitter because that's what I do with my life, Mike. I'm waiting with bated breath to see what the Toronto Marlies PR person is going to send out. No, they do it. They do a great job, and I'm really excited for this Marlies run because we know that they are the understudies to the Maple Leafs. But you do get the sense that this is the threshold between playing with your buds and winning together as a group and feeling like there's that youthful exuberance propelling what you're trying to do. There's still a very innocent quality to what you're trying to accomplish. Everything prior to the professional level. This is that kind of that middle ground from the pros to back to junior and vice versa. So you see these guys. The video that the Marlies person sent out of these guys doing stretches in downtown Syracuse, surrounded by the world-renowned Syracuse architecture, and they seem to be enjoying themselves and having a good time. So you hit the nail on the head that Travis Dermott's in this final run with his buds to try to win one, not only for himself but in a lot of ways for them too. So do you sense that, Mike? Whereas you go from the ACC and it's professional, man. Babcock's in and out, the players in and out. Whereas with the Marlies, there's a little more accessibility. It's a little more chill, right? Do you still get that sense? And as a reporter, do you kind of blend into that environment, blend into that way of thinking?
I think it's just as professional at Rico as it is at ACC. I mean, obviously it's an NHL building. The access to players is probably a little more stringent, but I mean, really the Marlies are a prep for the Leafs, and they treat it that way. I mean, Kyle Dubas has done a great job with the Marlies putting talent together. Sheldon Keefe, I think within probably, it could even be this summer, but within maybe 2 to 3 years is probably going to be a coach in the NHL based on his success with the Marlies. So, I mean, really it's preparatory for the NHL and for the next level. And that's why, like I said, a number of these players in the next 1 or 2 years are going to be wearing blue and white at 40 Bay.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about Sheldon Keefe. Again, we were speculating on Dubas and whether he is anointed Leafs general manager. What happens with Mark Hunter? Is there a mystery candidate out there that Brendan Shanahan may surprise the hockey world with? But you mentioned Sheldon Keefe. Clearly somebody who's if not isn't already, will be on the radar of NHL teams as a candidate potentially for coaching jobs, whether it be an assistant right out of the gate or even a head coach position somewhere. Is Sheldon Keefe considered in the same category as one of those young untouchables as a Kyle Dubas from the top down, or do you feel like, look, Mike Babcock will be that guy, and whether Sheldon Keefe gets an opportunity somewhere else, we're not going to stand in his way, but he's not somebody that the Leafs are going to want to protect to sort of keep in the system as maybe somebody who would replace Babcock one day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get that impression. I mean, we know that Babcock is probably going to be around for the full 8 years unless something goes dramatically wrong, which I don't foresee. And, we're talking about the window in terms of Sheldon Keefe being a year or two at most. I mean, the way the success that he's had with the Marlies, I think lends himself to be a candidate for a team out there fairly soon. But that being said, I mean, if he wanted to stick around Toronto, if head coaching opportunities did not arise, the next step might be becoming an NHL assistant behind Babcock, because we've seen in the past with guys like Todd McClellan and the Bill Peters and Paul McLean, that it's being an assistant to Babcock is a stepping stone for being an NHL coach. So, I mean, he could go that way and it would allow him to stay in Toronto. But I think if there are opportunities out there to be a head coach right away, you never know when you're going to get that chance. So you sort of have to jump at it. So I think there's a lot of respect for Sheldon Keefe. I think the fact that he's helped develop some of the players in this organization has been appreciated, but I don't think he's going to be the guy who's like laying in wait for Mike Babcock to move on. I think his window of opportunity is going to be fairly soon.
And interesting. This is the Leafs Conversation, by the way. Norman James in London, Mike Augello in Buffalo. Please check out our YouTube page. We've just hit 100 subscribers. Doesn't sound like much, but considering like 2 weeks ago we had 7 or 8, we're moving and shaking, and it's all because of Mike and you. So thank you very much. Go to the YouTube page, like and subscribe, tell your friends. We're in this to win this, folks. Just this whole scenario with Sheldon Keefe, perhaps laying in wait, or he's obviously fattening up his resume, and if he wins a Calder Cup, I mean, that's huge. I'm thinking back to 2005, 2006, 2007. Did Paul Maurice succeed Pat Quinn? Pat Quinn was let go, was he not? And did Paul Maurice? I know Paul Maurice was willing to coach the Marlies for a season or two in order to get that NHL job. Do you recall how that went? And obviously I'm relating this to Paul Maurice because, his team, his team is right there in the fight with the Nashville Predators trying to advance in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I mean, remember there was the lost year of the lockout in between, right? But Quinn was the coach in 2004 when they lost to Philadelphia, and then I don't believe I think it was Maurice who was the coach after Quinn. So yeah, I don't think there was anybody in between. There was no interim. There was no Nick Beverly after Pat Burns or Peter Horachuk after Randy Carlisle.
What, those Mike Murphy years? You don't remember those? The thing I remember about Mike Murphy the most is when he was jumping around in the press box with whoever it was, Cliff Fletcher in Detroit when Borshevsky scored that goal. That's what I remember of Mike Murphy. And the thing is, he coached the Leafs for 2 seasons. So pretty interesting stuff. And then you had Pat Quinn. He was fired after a 93 or 94 point season with the Leafs. They had just missed the playoffs. But, Pat Quinn was, other than what's happening right now, that Pat Quinn era, that's the era that Leaf fans tend to go to the most when referencing a successful period. Certainly that was a lot of fun. Pat Quinn, what a man. May he rest in peace. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with this. Is it a GM search the Leafs are undertaking right now, or do they know? Or are they just waiting for things to calm down? Maybe they're waiting for the Marlies to win their Calder Cup, and then Brendan Shanahan will start to compile his press release and make his announcement. Or do you think, look, there is something to the idea of, dotting all the I's, crossing the T's, unearthing every possibility before you make your decision? Are the Leafs looking for a general manager beyond Dubas and Hunter? And if they are, perhaps we put the assistant term before general manager and say they're looking for an AG.
Well, and that's the thing I sort of puzzled yesterday on Twitter when I was waiting for the game between Syracuse and the Marlies to start was, there's speculation out there about dark horse candidates, about, them going outside the organization. They may very well be doing that, but I would find it sort of hard to believe that they're going after outside candidates for the GM spot, because simply if they're doing that, we're talking about, like, if they hire Dubas or if they hire Hunter, they're going to lose the other one. Well, if they hire an outside candidate, they're likely going to lose both of them, lose Dubas and Hunter, unless it's somebody who they can work with. But they've been laying in wait for a couple years at the possibility of getting the general manager's job, and I can't see them staying around very long if somebody else comes in, like, at the 11th hour from outside the organization to be the next GM. I think it's going to be one of Dubas or Hunter. I don't know which one. They're doing what they've done in the Lamoriello era, which is keep things close to the vest. So we're probably not going to know until they make the press release and say who's going to be the GM. But I wouldn't doubt that, somebody like Chuck Fletcher or Ron Francis or somebody who has general manager experience in the NHL, like Joe Nieuwendyk or something like that, would be brought in as an AGM, as a sounding board to either Hunter or Dubas. And that would just make sense. That goes along with the Detroit model that Brendan Shanahan has been employing since he took over as team president. So I think you'll see that, but I continue to believe that outside voice will be an assistant and not a general manager.
Look, great minds know to be great, you have to work with other great minds. It's a collaborative effort, but at some point these great minds have aspirations of their own and they want to elevate their status. I'm wondering, do we know that Mark Hunter, his goal right now is to be general manager of the Maple Leafs? Like that, he clearly is capable of being the general manager of this team. His resume and his portfolio are second to none. Does he, again, I go back to the optically, does he want to be the guy to communicate the goings on of the franchise to the throng of media and have it go on? And if things go shitty, or is he the guy who's going to step up and tell everybody things are okay? Do we know for sure that this is what he wants, or is there a situation here where, Mark's ego might be starting to dictate how he feels about the potential of where this thing is going, knowing that if it's Kyle Dubas, maybe Mark doesn't want to be taking orders from a guy who's much younger. I'm speculating. I don't know. Maybe these guys are hanging out all the time, going to bars after the games because they're great guys, and we have this idea that there's a potential rift there, and that's just a non-starter. So do you know that Mark Hunter, he wants this job?
We don't know. I don't think we'll ever know for sure because I think, like I said, I think the level of secrecy within the Leaf organization is really at a high level. I think there's a possibility, and even though there have been reports that the Leafs will make a GM choice before the draft, I think there's a possibility that they maintain the status quo through Dallas because this is what they did I believe it was in 2015 before they hired Lamoriello. It was the three-pronged monster of Shanahan acting as the GM with Hunter handling the draft and Dubas handling trades. And Dubas apparently was mostly responsible for doing the legwork on the Kessel deal. So it gave him a little bit of experience as a general manager. So I think that's possible, but I think if they know who they're going to select, then you'll probably see it in the next couple of weeks. But I don't think we know the intentions or the feelings of either one of the candidates, and I think that's what they wanted.
Until they let us in, Mike, we're going to speculate, right? You must tell us. Brendan Shanahan should get on the phone with either you or I and tell us directly what's going on because we deserve it.
Yes.
We're owed that, aren't we? No, I'm kidding. I mean, we throw this stuff around, but, all I want to see a cohesive unit. I want to see an organization that is working together. Not everybody doesn't have to get along 100% of the time. There's nothing wrong with being a little feisty or, having a little disagreement here or there, or if you don't want to talk for a couple of days because you feel like your position wasn't listened to, and if somebody's pissing you off, that's fine. You come back to the table a bit later and you get back down to business. That's all I really care about, whether it's Hunter or Dubas or Shanahan himself. As long as these guys can all work it out and continue to work together towards the greater goal, and that's get this team out of the first round into the rounds beyond, and then within a short period of time, have this team hoist the Stanley Cup. Just a few more things before we go, Mike. Floated around out there, and again, we don't need to chew on this speculation too much, but Steve Yzerman, is this a why? What there was this just kind of chatter about, maybe Steve Yzerman's a guy that Brendan Shanahan would be talking to. They've obviously won cups together. They know each other. And maybe Steve Yzerman's the guy who would be a dark horse to jump on board with the Leafs. I'm just thinking, okay, sure, it would be a great scenario to go to, but isn't he in a great position already?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the name. I heard the name brought up as the Leafs have gone out and gotten the best out there, and Yzerman is clearly one of the best right now. But just why would he leave Tampa?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. That's not slagging on the Leafs, but you've got a great situation. You've got a great organization. I mean, Syracuse is an example of they have really good young players coming through in that organization. They're set up probably to take runs at multiple cups over the next, I'd say, half to maybe even decade. Why would he leave?
Sure.
I mean, would it be the allure of an original six team working with a guy like Brendan Shanahan?
Why now?
Why now? Exactly.
Okay. Anything else you want to tee up, Mike? I know that you're working on some theories. You're working on some stories. Obviously, you're ready to punch your ticket to either Lehigh Valley. Where the hell is that?
Allentown, PA. I probably won't be going to either Charlotte or Allentown for the Calder Cup Conference final, but I'll be covering every game at Rico. In terms of what, I wrote something yesterday or actually a couple days ago for Hockey Buzz regarding the Leafs picking 25th in the first round. Now that was determined by Pittsburgh and San Jose losing, so now their pick is set at 25. And if you look at their history in the Shanahan era, when they have a high pick, Obviously, Nylander, Marner, Matthews in the top 10. They've kept those picks, and they've made really good selections. When they've had lower picks that they've acquired through trade, they had a 24th pick overall when they got a first round pick from Nashville in the Cody Franzen deal. They got a pick from the Phil Kessel deal. They used those picks either to trade down or to trade out for a guy like Freddie Anderson. Now the Leafs are picking 25th. And you can't ignore the two areas of need for this team right now, which is depth at center and defense. And I believe that they're going to use that pick this year. I mean, their pipeline is rather stocked. I think they're going to use that first round pick along with maybe another player to go out and get themselves a top 4 defenseman. And we can only speculate about who that would be. But I'm saying, there are teams out there that will be looking for first round picks like Calgary, who traded theirs, and they have a lot of defensemen who are rumored to be potentially on the block. And that's where I think whoever it is, Dubas or Hunter, will focus on during the summer, is making a deal before the draft to get that top 4 defenseman. Because not to say the future is now, but they really have to upgrade that blue line in the next couple of years for them to be able to take legitimate shots at advancing in the playoffs.
Is a 25th pick really going to punctuate the ideology that you want to continue to accrue draft picks and you'd rather keep them over using them to trade? I mean, really, at this point, you have a team of young, talented, fired up, devoted, focused players on the Marlies right now, many of whom will end up playing in the NHL, hopefully for the Maple Leafs at some point in the near future, and who are seething to get their hands on that Calder Cup. You have that crew right now. This 25th pick at the end of the day could end up being redundant. Now, I don't know. They let's leave it to Mark Hunter and Dubas and Shanahan and that staff to run that strategy through their minds before they do anything. But I think the whole idea of not mortgaging the future in order to to try to improve things short term, that's just a tired comment at this point, or an overused comment, or a comment that really doesn't, or a process that really doesn't need to be utilized at this point, because the Leafs have been doing that for such a long period of time. It's time to take that next step.
Well, the thing is that if you use the indicators of what was rumored at the deadline, they already considered trading this first round pick. I mean, they were in on the Ryan McDonough deal, and if they had completed it, the first round pick this year would have likely been part of the deal. There was talk about them, being in the talks for Erik Karlsson, and that they were looking for another first round pick to acquire to be as part of a package to get Erik Karlsson. Well, that means they were trading either this year or next year's first in that deal. So I don't think it's a leap to say, okay, if a Chris Tanev or a Dougie Hamilton or somebody like that comes out, or Oliver Ekman-Larsson comes on the market, that the Leafs would hesitate to trade this pick along with probably another prospect or two to get that defenseman. And it's not to say it's like the future is now, because I think anybody that they acquire is somebody is going to be locked up for at least a few years. So it's not like a one and done scenario or a rental situation. So that's why I think you're going to see in Dallas at the draft, before the draft, or maybe after the draft, them make a deal for a defenseman.
There's going to be so much to talk about related to the Maple Leafs in the days, weeks, and months to come. We're not going to digest it all right now, and we'll plan out for future Leaf conversations. Norman James, Mike Augello. Final thing for you, Mike. I love your tweet yesterday. Hey, the Washington Capitals get through onto the conference finals now. Congratulations to them. They earned the right to lose to Tampa Bay. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I picked Tampa to go to the Cup final, to come out of the East, and I expected Washington to need the Heimlich maneuver, and they surprised me by beating Pittsburgh. But if you looked at Pittsburgh in that series, they didn't look like the Pittsburgh of old. They looked really tired. They looked worn out. They've been through 2 battles to win the Stanley Cup the last 2 years, and I think that it finally caught up with them. Malkin was hurt. I think Kessel was hurt. So, full marks for the Caps to finally get over that hurdle. But they're not the team that they were last year. They're not deep. Backstrom is hurt. I don't think they have a chance against Tampa. I'm not saying Tampa is going to sweep them, but I think Tampa will at worst win in 6. But I don't see Washington beating them. So I think it's going to be Tampa Bay going to the final.
I love the Crosby haters, people chirping Pittsburgh, but Crosby in particular. Oh, he's a baby. You're done. You're done. The guy just won 2 straight cups. He's won 3 cups. He's one of the greatest players ever. Cool it with the chirping a little bit. I have some perspective. Who do you think's in the cup final, Mike? Who do you think it's going to be? Tampa and
I think the winner of Winnipeg Nashville is going to be the team in the West. Although I hesitate to pick against Vegas because they're just Cinderella. Everything has turned to gold for them. But I just think that Winnipeg and Nashville are so overwhelming in terms of talent that they will find a way to beat Vegas. So I'm predicting. I picked Nashville, so I'm predicting Tampa and Nashville.
Mike, your freighters arrived. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Norm.
Alrighty, that's going to wrap it up. Make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube page. We need your support. We want to keep growing this thing every single time Mike and I take to the airwaves, so you have another place to come back to listen and hear and think about what is going on with the Maple Leafs. At I Am Sports Heart on Twitter, at the Leafs Convo on Twitter. Follow those Twitter accounts, and you'll get up-to-date information about what we are planning for future podcasts. You can also follow the legend himself at Mike in Buffalo, and Bob is your uncle. Do you have an Uncle Bob? I think I do. I think he's dead. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. This is the Leafs Convo. We'll talk to you soon.